Newmarket, the cradle of the sport of horse racing, but in recent weeks the epicentre of a scandal, the tremors of which might yet be felt all around the racing world. I've come to Newmarket to find out more about anabolic steroids. What are they? What do they do? And what threat might they pose? We'll look at the rules and the loopholes. We'll look at the status quo and what the future might hold.
Well, my name's David Dugdale. I'm the managing partner of Newmarket Equine Hospital. That's a large veterinary hospital based in Newmarket, some 30 vets and 70 or so support staff. We look after a good few of the trainers in Newmarket and many of the stud farms in and around Newmarket. We also take care of the race day veterinary services. Personally, I've been working in Newmarket with horses in training for over 25 years. I sit on the BHA Veterinary Committee. I'm the veterinary advisor to the Racehorse Owners Association, and I'm a past president of the British Equine Veterinary Association.
Well positioned, in other words, to have a very detailed understanding of the rules as regards the medication of racehorses. Fill us in, what is the situation as regards the rules?
So medication is allowed during training, and this allows common setbacks which all horses in training sustain, bangs, knocks, inflamed joints, to be treated by anti-inflammatories or the appropriate veterinary medicine under veterinary supervision. And each of these products has a very clearly defined withdrawal period. So the trainers will administer a mild anti-inflammatory. They'll understand that there is a withdrawal period before the horse can run, and then the horse will then run on the clear understanding that there is no medication present in the horse on the day that it runs. So that's the vast majority of the medication surveillance that goes on, but there's a small number of agents which, as well as not being allowed to be present on the day of the race, they are prohibited from being used during the training period. Now, this is a small number of agents, which includes anabolic steroids, it includes EPO, and it includes a number of peptides. So let's talk about anabolic steroids. The term steroids is a broad group of agents, and it includes both corticosteroids, which are anti-inflammatories. They are used to treat inflammation, as the name suggests, and they are permitted during training. The other part of the steroid group are the anabolic steroids. Now, these cause increase in muscle mass. They allow horses to recover quicker from serious hard exercise. They allow them to bounce back from minor injuries. In the UK, they are prohibited from use in training for the very reason that they are performance-enhancing drugs. And as I said, until very recently, there was has been very little positive samples for either race day samples or in training samples.
On that topic, David, you've said very clearly, you mentioned some peptides, EPO, which people will have heard of from the world of cycling and blood doping, and anabolic steroids are absolutely prohibited in training. In your experience, would all veterinary surgeons and all trainers reasonably be expected just to know that?
Yes, absolutely. It is very much part of a licensing process that they agree to stay up to date with be informed of the rules of racing and stay up to date with any changes. So it is, I think it's very clear that trainers will understand the rules of racing, and veterinary surgeons who work within the racing industry will be familiar with it as well.
It's an interesting dynamic there, because the trainer has liability, he's the license holder. How much responsibility, in your view, rests with you and your colleagues in the veterinary profession? Are you under an obligation to be up to speed with the rules of every sport you're working with?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. If we are working within racing, we need to be familiar with the rules of racing. If we are working under FEI regulations, we need to be familiar with FEI regulations. So it is incumbent on the veterinary surgeon to be familiar with the rules and the regulatory framework of the body that they're working within.
One of the issues that's arisen recently, and we won't go into individual cases for obvious reasons, but one or two have suggested that perhaps we need to keep an open mind about possible therapeutic uses of anabolic steroids, for example in joint injuries and so on. Do you think that's wise? Do you think we should keep that option open or not?
Well, I think at the moment we must work within the rules as they stand. Now, what you're referring to is medication of joints with small amounts of anabolic steroids. Now, the science on that is unproven at best, and we really are waiting further scientific information. And really, until that scientific information is there, we can't really approve or alter the rules. And equally, allied to the lack of science, the rules and regulations are very clear. Anabolic steroids cannot be used in training. Now, that doesn't matter whether it's intramuscular or intra-articular, because a certain amount of the intra-articular injection will leak into the body as a whole, and we're not sure that it won't have an effect on the body as a whole. So these are unknowns, and while they're unknowns, we must adhere to the rules as they exist.
It is possible, of course, we mentioned the difference between the British racing setup and other jurisdictions. It's possible for horses to come and race here who may have had steroids in the past, anabolic steroids in the past, who would test clean on race day. It wouldn't be in their system. In your view as a vet, are they potentially enjoying an advantage?
Well, I think we have to be honest and say they may be. Now, I think we all get excited when Australian horses come over, and when we send our horses to Hong Kong and to North America. And racing is now a global industry, and we all enjoy that and get excited by that. So I think this is a timely opportunity for international regulatory authorities to sit down and say, look, we really must create a level playing field, so that, for example, in Australia, anabolic steroids can be used in training, but they must be out of the system on the day of the race. Other countries have similar rules. Certain states in North America, again, you're allowed to use steroids during training, but they must be out of the system on the day of the race. So this is a real opportunity to sit down and say, look, let's have a level playing field. We want to see global racing prosper. We don't want accusations of this or that, whether founded or unfounded. We want people to be able to say horses compete on their merits. And this is, if anything good can come out of it, it will hopefully be that the international regulators will sit down and try and get a level playing field. Somebody
of your stature, David, might well be involved in those discussions. You might be sitting down with Australian vets and American vets who'll be saying, listen, David, what we're doing is okay. We're not harming the horse, we're not harming the breed. You need to change more to our way of thinking. Would you have any sympathy with that argument, or would you argue for our status?
Well, no, I think we do try and take the moral high ground, however shaky we may be at the moment. We want drug-free racing. We want it drug-free on the day of the racing, and we want to prohibit these certain substances that have a prolonged and indefinable effect. So I do think we must be looking towards banning anabolic steroids in training, and therefore we can all say we're competing on a level playing field.
James, you've been quite vocal about this topic. You clearly care about the topic. What's your major area of concern?
I'm always wanting to see a level playing field. I know that may feel a bit old-fashioned or sound a bit old-fashioned, old school, whatever, but if horses have been given an unnatural physical advantage, I think that it just distorts what really is going on in the sport.
Let's talk about the unlevel international playing field. That horses can come from the United States, from Australia, where possibly at some point in their careers they may have had some medications which they wouldn't be allowed here. How do we close that loophole? Are you satisfied with doing enough?
I think under the current abilities to test and so on, that it is done the best. The trainers have to sign a document that says and it lists a whole load of anabolic steroids and other drugs that the animal has never received in its life. They are tested on arrival, shortly after arrival, although the BHA aren't required and discuss their testing policy. I think it's commonly held that they test soon after arrival and again shortly before actual racing. The last thing they'd want to do is an international runner to run well and then test positive. So they are tested probably once or twice at least on arrival. It only makes sense. But I think under the current situations, that is as much as the authority could be or should be expected to do.
No matter how rigorous the testing is, though, there are loopholes. We've mentioned the international loophole. There's a potential domestic loophole as well, in that if I own a horse with you, James, I might be doing anything I like with it when it's back at my place in the winter, and then it comes back to you in the spring, and you can't be sure, can you, what I've been doing?
Not at all, no. We don't have to sign that document when our horses run. So there is that almost disparity between the international and national runners. But I think if horses are coming from jurisdictions where other medications are different, the rules of them then that is appropriate. But as you say, if when you have a horse with me and you take it home in the winter, I'm not to know what you're giving it. And indeed, even we have this system in our country of a horse is in training or out of training, and it's just how it's registered at Weatherby's. If it's in training and on a licensed premises, it is governed by the rules of racing. If it's out of training and still in my premises on a licensed premises, it's still governed by rules of racing. But if it's out of training and on an unlicensed premise, it's not governed by the rules of racing. I'm led to believe that's different in France. The moment a horse gets registered in France, it's then effectively considered in racing, in training, whatever, wherever it is, and that probably helps clear the air up a bit, clear the picture a bit. But it does leave the loophole that if I was minded to do so, a horse in my yard, I could literally put it across the road in my neighbour's paddock and in my neighbour's stable, give it whatever, not record it because I'm not required to at that point, give it the 4 to 6 weeks and bring it back in and carry on training it once it effectively was going to test clear. And that is a potential loophole, because the testing procedure is only so much at the moment.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? Because there's an overlap there. We've got an international discrepancy. We've got potentially a domestic discrepancy, and it relies on the honesty of owners and trainers. Unless we can test even more accurately or over longer periods, is there scope to do that?
Well, there are various. There has been a move recently to test in other ways. I know that there are certainly in the pipeline looking at using hair samples, which can record back. Well, there's kind of recording in the. To call it recording is probably inappropriate, but the chemistry of the hair is influenced by what's going on in the body at the time the hair is growing. And so you can be looking back to sort of maybe up to a year in that case. Now, if that was the case and that was to come online and become a regulatory test, that I think can clear up the picture even more, because still operating a zero tolerance, and you're looking back over 12 months, I can't do what I just said, where I'll put the horse in my neighbour's stable and bring it back in 6 weeks' time. I've got to be thinking 12 months. Well, the point of the drug then, the horse has missed a year's training. So I would be in favour of this test becoming, first of all, you've got to establish that it works, and that if it was to work properly, it would become a regulatory test. I think that would it would clear the picture even more, I think.
John, we're here in the heart of Newmarket, which itself is the heart of racing, the cradle of racing, if you like. How big a deal has this story been, the recent couple of weeks of news for Newmarket and for racing?
Absolutely massive. The BHA's disciplinary department is active probably every week of the year. There are, in any walk of life, there are transgressions, but there's bottom end transgressions and top end of transgressions, and being fined for being late into the parade ring, or forgetting to take the right colours to the races, or your horse's flu jab being 1 year in a day after the predecessor when it should have been a day after. They, with the best will in the world, everyone gets things wrong past the time, but it's the difference between driving at 35 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour limit and getting in your car, driving flat out into a crowd of people and causing mayhem.
And from a trainer's point of view, would you have any sympathy with the idea that maybe we should keep an open mind on anabolic steroids, for example, that maybe there are therapeutic uses for them, maybe we should explore some of those avenues?
I wouldn't, for two reasons. The first one is that, in the 21st century, it's become clear that public opinion on anabolic steroids is that they have no place in a sporting environment whatsoever. Behind us in that pen we've got a horse who looks terrific now. Last August he was on death's door. He had colic, which is gut trouble. He had to be operated upon in Newmarket Equine Hospital. He came as close to death as any horse would ever do. That was a circumstance I could see someone might have said, gosh, that horse has had such a tough time and he's so close to death. And I mean, I don't know, he must have lost 80 kilos or something. He needs every help he can get. And if anabolic steroids are going to help, give it to him. He had, we turned him out at National Side, he had grass, he had fresh air, he had, he was Dr. Green. Dr. Green is what we've been saying for decades. He had Dr. Green, and he looks absolutely terrific now. So, if he can come back from the dead without anabolic steroids, no horse ever needs them.
Is there any more that the BHA as regulator could be doing?
I don't think the BHA has anything to cover up because, major problems like this are as few and far between as they can get, and so they've just got to get the message across that, racing is a sport where things by and large are done right.
Events here in Newmarket have shown that there are individuals who are willing to break the rules. And we also know that there are those who want to debate whether to keep the existing rules in place at all. But what I've found is a surprising degree of consensus. People seem to know absolutely what the rules are, they know why those rules are in place, and they seem determined to keep them in place. In time, the scandal here in Newmarket will die down, and the debate will continue. And when it does, it seems that many voices in British racing will argue that less tolerance, not more, is the way forward.